Hello, and welcome back to Philosophy 1050, an introduction to philosophy. This is Lecture 8. In today's lecture, we'll be covering books 6 and 10 of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle's Ethics, otherwise known as virtue ethics, exists to this day as a major branch of ethics. Despite living over 2,000 years ago, Aristotle's ideas still live on. The first thing we need to get clear on when we're talking about Aristotle's ethics is what exactly a virtue is. Virtue. So a virtue, according to Aristotle, is the intermediate area between two vicious extremes. Intermediate between two vicious extremes. So, if we think back to our last lecture, I actually gave an example of this, and if we think about one vice, specifically cowardice, we can imagine that on the other end of that vice, there's another sort of vice, which is called foolhardiness. Now, if cowardice is sort of shying away from any bit of risk at all and being a coward, then foolhardiness would be the opposite of that. That'd be rushing into danger when, realistically speaking, that's a bad move. So let's say jumping into a rhino pit or something like that because you can take them. That would be foolhardy. Now, between these two extremes, says Aristotle, there is a thing we call bravery or courage. And that is the right sort of middle between them. We can think of another example for it, and that would be, let's say, stinginess. You know, sort of Ebenezer Scrooge kind of not going to even give a penny to charity kind of thing. And then on the other side of that, we have something like, let's call it liberality. And that's where you're entirely liberal with your funds. So anyone who asks you for anything, you give it to them. You give gifts out all the time, lavish parties. And so generally speaking, you're giving away all your money to the point where you actually even become poor. And between those two extremes, we have a virtue known as charitability. And that's where, you give a decent amount, but you don't bankrupt yourself. So ultimately in these cases, we need to follow a rule in order to figure out where the right balance lies. Or in Aristotle's words, the intermediate is guided by the right rule. Thus, in Book 6, Aristotle sets out to establish what the right rule for determining the intermediate is. To do this, he starts by talking about the rational mind and its parts. So, let's make some room here. So he says that the rational mind is composed of two main parts. We have the calculative, otherwise known as the contemplative, and we have the scientific, otherwise known as the practical. So, what are these? So the calculative and contemplative mind deals with matters of invariability. In other words, it deals with questions where the answer to that question doesn't change over time. Now, the scientific and practical, it deals, as you might expect, with matters of variability. Or in other words, questions where the answer to that question changes over time. So, by variability, what is, let's see here. So, for example, the answer to how many sides a triangle has does not change over time, and so therefore it is in the domain of the calculative. Whereas the answer to whether or not you should cross the street does change according to the time, because you have to consider certain matters of context, such as, are there any cars coming, or do you even want to cross the street in the first place? So because of that, it is in the domain of the practical mind. Now, next, Aristotle wants to establish what virtue is. So, according to him, and because we already have our definition up there, I'm just going to get rid of these. According to him, a virtue, or in other words, the virtue of something, because virtue is relative to what something is, the virtue of a thing is relative to a thing's proper work. Keyword, proper work. So in other words, it's teleology, what it's meant to do, the reason, for the sake of which it exists. So if the human mind has two parts, then each part must have its proper work. So, coming back to let's call it just the contemplative and the practical, each one of these is meant to have its proper work, beyond just the fact that it deals with matters of variability and invariability. So, the proper work of the contemplative mind is to seek truth and falsity, and to assign to those things the values of good and bad, respectively. So in other words, to be clear, truth is good, falsity is bad, to the contemplative mind. Now, what about the practical mind? Well, the practical mind deals with truth in agreement with right desire. Or in other words, what works? So, the practical mind is only worried about finding out what's true relative to what can help it achieve its desire. But the desire has to be right. It has to be a correct sort of desire. So choice, therefore, exists in the realm of the practical mind. Choice he defines as combination between reason and desire. You cannot choose something unless, first of all, you intend to do it, you desire it, and you reason it out. It's not just some fluke of your mind. It's not an accident. So if you desire something good and take the right steps to take it, then it's said that you've made a right choice. So given all of this, we find that since both of the minds seem to aim at truth, albeit in different forms, then the virtue of a mind is the state that allows it to aim at truth. So, again, since virtue is relative to a thing's proper work, and the proper work of these two things is aiming at truth, then the virtue of a mind, generally speaking, is aiming at truth. So, having established what this virtue of the mind should be, Aristotle sets out to consider the possible states of mind aiming at truth, so as to discover which one of these can be considered virtue. So let's make some room here. So then, he gives us a few options for states of the mind that aim at truth, which could be, the virtue of a mind. So, first off, we have scientific knowledge. Next up, we have practical wisdom. Philosophic wisdom. And lastly, we have intuitive reason. So he wants to examine these sorts of states of the mind to, first of all, understand them or communicate a little bit more understanding about them, but also to see which one is the best option. So he defines scientific knowledge as the production of universals, keyword, via the method of induction. Another keyword. So at this point, it's important to define what the method of induction actually means. So arguments come in two main forms, basically. They come in inductive form and deductive form. So inductive arguments are basically arguments that proceed from individual observations, and from those individual observations they generalize to some sort of universal. So let's say these stand for a bunch of observations. We have a bunch of observations, and then we take all those observations and we provide some sort of universal that is a generalized rule that applies to all of our observations. So that's what science does. It produces universals via the method of induction, which is just taking a bunch of different observations into account in order to generalize. So an example of this would be something like, for the past 42 times I've put Mentos into Diet Coke. The Diet Coke has shot out of the bottle. I can therefore conclude that Mentos causes Diet Coke to shoot out of the bottle or to fizz up. So you can sort of establish universals based on particular observed instances. And that's what the inductive method is. The deductive method, spelled deduction, or deductive, inductive, is basically operates in the other direction. So the inductive method would do something like take this claim and break it down into the idea that, so let's say Mentos in the bottle causes the bottle to fizz. I have put Mentos in the bottle, therefore the bottle will fizz. Now, you don't have to worry too much about this. This is formal logic, which you will learn in other classes. But for now, just so you know what it is, it's basically a way of stating your arguments or what you're trying to say in a very clear and logical manner. These are logical connectives, and there's certain rules that you can take from what you can assume to what you can conclude, and that's what deduction is. And notice then, again, that it's taking the universal produced from induction and using it to conclude a particular, or in other words, that the bottle will fizz because I've put Mentos in it. Let's see here. Now, the topic of logic and arguments also could be a class in of itself. So, and these are titled Philosophy of Logic and Philosophy of Science. So if that's what you're interested in, check it out. Moving on, Aristotle discusses the next important form of truth-giving, practical wisdom. So practical wisdom is the reasoned ability to act with regard to the things that are good or bad for you. I'm not going to write it down because it's going to take too long, but nevertheless, let me say that one more time. Practical wisdom is the reasoned ability to act with regard to what is good or bad for you. Or in other words, it's the ability to operate in a way that gets you the desire, that satisfies your desires. And not only that, but the desires that you have are good. So Aristotle discusses how scientific knowledge, after that, isn't complete by itself. So scientific knowledge here actually can't just stand on its own. It requires something called first principles. These are more abstract rules of thought and cannot be produced through science itself, nor can they be produced through practical or philosophical wisdom. Instead, scientific knowledge needs to appeal to the intuitive reason in order to even sort of supports the notion of induction in the first place, because you can't justify induction except through, and this is actually a huge topic which we will get into a little bit more when we cover Hume, but you can't justify it except through some sort of intuitive appeal. It just works. It seems to work, but there's no actual logical, deductive way that you can justify that. Now, so practical wisdom then seems to be something like scientific knowledge combined with intuitive reason. So let's write that down then. So practical wisdom is psi knowledge plus intuitive reason and here's the kicker, plus goodness. And we will get into that a little bit later in a few minutes here. Philosophical wisdom is wisdom concerning the highest objects. So this, tends to be things like justice or the gods or something like that. And political wisdom is a subcategory of practical wisdom, because instead of being aimed at your own good, political wisdom is aimed at the good of society more generally. So all of these sorts of states then, Aristotle says, are virtues of the mind, each and every one of these. Practical wisdom being perhaps the most important, because it combines moral virtue with practical knowledge to aim well and achieve those aims. So Aristotle thus says that it's impossible to be practically wise without being good, since being practically wise requires not only the knowledge of how to aim well, but also the wisdom of knowing where to aim. So with this concludes book 6. Now this book is a little bit hard to follow, and Aristotle doesn't pull any punches here. In all, to sum it up, Aristotle is wanting to establish that there is a connection between being a mind and being virtuous. To be a mind is to seek truth, and to seek truth requires seeking virtue. This will become important in the next chapter that we're about to cover, chapter 10. Now, there is a bit of space between chapter 6 and chapter 10, and Aristotle does some work there that, if you're interested in, you can find those chapters online, as they've been printed many, many times. So, in chapter 10, Aristotle's goal is to explain the nature of human happiness. Now, why does he want to do this? Well, he wants to do this because happiness, as he's established in the previous chapters, which we haven't read, is the end goal of human life. So human happiness is human purpose. Humans' purpose, in other words, or the best state that they can tend towards, is happiness. Now, it's important to get clear on what exactly happiness is. So he gives us a few things. First of all, happiness it's an activity. And this part kind of makes sense, right? Because happiness isn't just like a badge of honor that once you've attained it, you get to keep it forever. No, happiness is more like something that you actively have to strive for. So, it comes and it goes. Depending on whether you're actually actively happy. Next, Aristotle distinguishes between activities that are for the sake of something else or for the sake of themselves. And he wants to say that happiness falls into the category of things that are for the sake of itself. It's its own goal. There's no purpose beyond it. So happiness, he goes on, lacks nothing and can be enjoyed for its own sake, the same way that doing good and noble deeds can be enjoyed for their own sake. Pleasant amusements also could count as things that are enjoyable for the sake of themselves, but amusements come at a cost. So just because people like to be amused doesn't mean anything. The same way we can distinguish between the opinion of someone who's experienced and someone who's inexperienced, we can distinguish between good and bad opinion. Those who believe happiness it just is amusement are wrong. They have bad opinions, according to Aristotle. We do not, for example, suffer through a life of toil just to be amused. No, instead we suffer through a life of work in order to be happy. Amusement does have its place, though, as relaxation. But in that case, it's being done for the sake of something else. You're not amusing yourself just so that you can amuse yourself. You're amusing yourself so that you can get energy so that you can do your other activities. So in other words, you're amusing yourself for the sake of your other activities. Now, if you're amusing yourself just for the sake of amusing yourself, then you're almost certainly not on the path to happiness, says Aristotle. Now, happiness, he continues, consists in excellence. In excellence. And excellence, he says, consists in exertion. And not just exertion, but exertion to the most excellent activity. So then, because happiness being the purpose would be paired with the most excellent of activities. So then, Aristotle wants to sort of ask or establish what is the most excellent activity. Well, the answer that he gives is that the most excellent activity is philosophy. Surprise, surprise. Well, how does he establish that philosophy is the best activity. He does this by giving us a few arguments. First of all, he says that philosophy is self-sufficient. It lacks nothing. It is pleasant to do. It has to do with the intellect, and it is leisurely. So, let's clean this up just a little bit. So, first thing he wants to say is that it's different from the military and political pursuits because the military and political success is defined by something outside of itself. So, military success is defined by victory, and it's done for the sake of victory. Political success is defined by the good of society, and therefore is done for the sake of the good of society. Moreover, politics and military matters are not leisurely, whereas whatever the happiness of human happiness is, it has to be leisurely, as Aristotle established earlier. So he continues then, if the intellect is divine, then life according to it is divine. The reason for this, he contends, is that the true life of a person basically exists in their mind. And so the intellectual life is definitely where the most excellent activity would be. It would be the most you, the closest thing to the real you, because the real you is your mind. He then goes on to make another point. The intellectual pursuit requires no resources or materials. So if we think back to the politics and the military, let's say the brave man and the charitable man. So the brave man, who might be a military person, in order for him to carry that out and be brave, he requires soldiers and resources. Conversely, the charitable man needs money in order to be charitable. If he has nothing to give away, then he can't be charitable. So these things require something, whereas the human happiness that Aristotle is trying to get at requires nothing else. So it can't be those things. The intellectual pursuit, conversely, requires nothing. The only excellence possible for gods is intellectual excellence. So gods can't be charitable because they don't lack anything. Gods can't be brave because they can't be killed. Gods can't be temperate because they don't have any bad appetite, so they can't actually be tempted by something and resist that temptation. And they can't do nothing because that wouldn't be very godly of them. So they must be doing something. What is left to the gods, says Aristotle, is intellectual pursuit. So it makes sense that the intellectual pursuit is what they would find most holy in humans, or the most divine in humans. If it is considered to be the best part of humans by gods, then surely it must be the most excellent activity, period. He goes on to give the example of animals. Animals cannot be happy, and this makes sense because happiness is an intellectual pursuit. Although our understanding about the intelligence of animals has come a long way, it's still an open debate whether whether animals can truly be happy, or whether they just enjoy themselves in some more basic way. In any case, here Aristotle is trying to appeal to our common sense. It makes sense that animals cannot be happy because they cannot contemplate. This is where Aristotle, after having established that philosophy is the most excellent activity, and therefore the path to happiness, tries to describe what it would take to make people happy. Now, before we do that, let's just follow the sort of chain of ideas here. So Aristotle wants to say that what is good is to follow your purpose, humanity's purpose is to pursue happiness. The way to pursue happiness is through doing excellent things. And the way to do excellent things and be excellent, according to Aristotle, is philosophy. But, as I was saying, this isn't quite enough. We need a little bit more to actually get people there. Just providing them the arguments doesn't really do much. They must be first inspired to care about the arguments in the first place. Or in other words, if they don't care about this part here, then that undermines the whole chain right off the bat. Aristotle calls the thing that people need passion. Some people have a passion, a love for what is noble and a hate for what is ignoble. But to reliably get that kind of passion in people, you would need some sort of strict government regime that control people's lives from youth. That way they would accept the beliefs about happiness as a matter of habit, basically. So Aristotle goes on, a noble person will listen to arguments, but an ignoble person who only seeks pleasure will only listen to pain, like a beast of burden, he says. Thus, what is important in a society is that it has good rulers and good parents that can inspire a love for the noble in their children. Anyone can become good, says Aristotle, and practice philosophy, so nobody is fixed to be ignoble from birth. Anyone can become noble. The sophists, he says, and we heard a little bit about them in our previous lectures, the sophists claim to teach politics, as they put it in the same category as something called rhetoric. Now, Aristotle wants to say that the problem with the sophists is that they lack basic understanding. And I think it is worth it to spend a little bit of time on this word here, rhetoric. So rhetoric is, roughly speaking, the art of convincing. So with rhetoric, you're able to kind of spin words in a nice way so that you can convince someone independent of whether or not you're actually right. And this is the sort of phenomenon we saw when we were looking at Socrates and sort of people he was talking to. A lot of them might be categorized as sophists because they claim to have certain knowledge and are able to give that impression through their ability to spin words in a way that can run circles around people who aren't so gifted. Socrates was gifted in rhetoric, and so he could see through that and cut through it by asking basic questions. But Aristotle's basic contention here is that the sophists, they try to pretend that they know about what goes into excellence and philosophy, but they make moves like saying that rhetoric and politics is the same thing. But the problem there, again, is that rhetoric without any substance to back it up is completely, empty rhetoric, and so can actually be destructive by spreading bad ideas. Now, to conclude, Aristotle's goal in the Nicomachean Ethics was establishing a framework for understanding how to be good. To Aristotle, to be good is to fulfill your purpose. To fulfill our purpose, because we're humans, is to pursue happiness. The way to pursue happiness, according to Aristotle, is to be the most excellent you can be. And the way to be the most excellent you can be is to live a life of intellectual pursuit, otherwise known as philosophy. Thus, in a nutshell, basically what Aristotle is trying to say is that to be good, you need to do philosophy. Now, whether or not that's true, that's a further discussion, but that's certainly what he's trying to say. Well, with that concludes our lecture. Join us next time where we're going to be covering Descartes. See you there.